All right, so I'm Wes Hardaker, and I'm super excited today to bring Varina Patel to our Sphere 2 cohort for just a quick lecture on her style of shooting and the amazing work she does. Varina was the first master of the Arcanum, if you actually count. It was possibly on the order of hours, but we still take that as she was the very first master to accept a student in, which was fantastic. She's an amazing nature photographer and does a very much minimalistic kind of viewpoint a lot, which is why I thought she'd be a great fit to talk to you guys. She was my personal mentor and a gigantic inspiration to a lot of my work, and I have to thank her endlessly for the amount of support she gave me. So the goal is for the next hour, we'll let her chat for a little bit, and we'll go around the room for a quick introduction first. But Varina, anything to start off with?
I am Varina.
Sounds good.
I think we've got a little echo here.
Yeah, so if you can mute your microphones when you're not talking, especially that'll work well, and I'll do that too. That's actually why I was trying to plug in headphones a minute ago.
Right.
So, all right, so why don't we do introductions going from Stefan to Linda to Jason to Fernando to Duncan and to Debbie. Just give a quick couple words about the type of photography you like to do so she has a baseline. Sound good? And Stefan, you have to unmute.
I just lost the window. I'll start by saying that I think Bonnie wants in if she doesn't know how to.
Thank you. I will make that happen. Yep.
Okay, good. So I'm Stefan. I'm one of the first in Wes's Sphere 2, but I'm one of the slowest, apparently. And I was always also in Varina's Sphere 0 and 1 alongside Wes. It feels like a long time ago, but it was a fantastic journey. And I sure wouldn't be the photographer I am today if I hadn't done that. Doesn't mean that I'm in a special, but it helped in so many ways. It made me grow immensely. And I will always be grateful for that. So it's a special time to have Varina here today for me too. I'm very happy to see you here.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, Linda, are you there?
I'm here. This is actually my second time through Sphere 2. I did Ron Clifford's landscape one. And landscapes, ginormous landscapes with my wide angle are my passion. But I've decided that they look better when they're minimalistic, as much as you can get those kind of photos minimalistic. So that's why I'm here, and I'm really enjoying Wes's Sphere and all the weird things he has me shooting. I was shooting ugly things on Thursday, so I have to edit my ugly photos later today.
Oh yes, that's one of my favorite challenges, just to be pure mean. So, all right, Jason.
All right, and I'm Jason. I was a graduate and a good friend with Wes. We're actually shooting this week out in Chicago. I do usually black and white stuff. Occasionally sneak a little color in, but I do some minimalist, some nature stuff. Did street this last week. So my interest kind of swerves wherever the camera happens to take me. But I like figuring out a way to pretty much make any area work for me, except portraits. Portraits are bad for me, but everything else is good. So.
And you processed 6 pictures before I even got the cameras out of my card from Wednesday, so you win. But
I've actually got more than that. I've only posted 6.
So. Oh, okay. Fernando.
Hi. Like Stefan, I'm also one of the first apprentices in Wes Cohort. Pretty slow progress as well, but I must say it's been really, really interesting and helped me a lot in improving my photography. But this goes also to the beginning of the Arcanum with in the cohort of Varina, like Stefan. We were, let's say, the first ones. So we've been around for quite a long time. And all thanks to a great master that we all have and that is here tonight. That for sure made a huge difference in the way I shoot today and the way my images look today. Although they're not anything special, for me they are. And I'm trying to work harder to improve that. One sad thing of all this journey until now is that I've lost all my photography that I had in a RAID system, and incredibly, these two went dead at the same time. And the saddest news is that the data recovery company could not retrieve any data. So that this should be, it is a tough lesson for me. Out of that work, there's some nice photos that it's really sad I've lost them. I mean, the high resolution ones, I still have them published here and there, but it's a tough lesson, and that everyone also be aware of. Even array systems or whatever you have, always get a third, a fourth backup.
Yeah, my heart broke for you when I heard the news the other day that the recovery system failed to get anything back. That's just devastating. I'm so sorry, Fernando.
No, it is.
So
So
hard.
On the outside, you can look forward as a restarting, right? This is the new Fernando and the new you, and
Exactly.
all of your work is going to look like you have spent years and years, but yet it's still image number one. So that's something that nobody gets to do.
So I'm really glad to be here tonight, and to hear Varina again. So I couldn't miss this.
All right, Duncan, thank you, Fernando.
Yeah, I'll resist the temptation to define myself, because I think I've given up trying to do that at all, Wes. I used to live not long ago, not far from probably where you live, Varina, but in the Rocky Mountain area, and probably started out in digital, at least, doing a lot of landscapes, which I love. But I think I'm somewhere between new topographic, photo documentary, contemplative minimalist, black and white guy. I shoot anything. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as I think it'll make an interesting photo.
Yep.
And I think that's all there is to it. I spent a lot of time working with Charles Lupica and Jean-Michel Misry on this digital journey, at least, and then recently Wes, and just kind of continue. I'm living in Hong Kong now for a couple of years, so lots of different opportunities here with architecture, street architecture, and so on. So
yeah, you've done some great architecture shots. All right, thanks. And last but not least, Debbie, who has to unmute.
Yes. I'm Debbie. I started out in Wes's foundation sphere, loved it, learned so much. Went back with him for a second sphere 2. Made that learning minimalistic photography would help in my landscape photography, and it did. I think my landscapes have improved immensely since then. And now I'm with Robin Griggs Wood, who scares the crap out of me, but still learning a ton from her. It's good. Been looking forward to this date ever since Wes announced it, because I shouldn't say this, huge fangirl of the Patels ever since I came across them a couple of years ago. So I'm looking forward to reading this talk.
Thank you. That's so nice. It's so nice to hear. I almost spit out my coffee when you said you were afraid of Robin.
It's true.
Robin does a very good job with the whole tough love attitude. She is amazingly nice, but she will push you to do better things in a very good way.
Yes.
I was just telling Jeannie this morning that I think Robin's stuff is harder than anything I did in nursing school.
Wow.
Oh, good.
Wow. I need to have a conversation with her. See what I'm not doing right. Maybe I want to instill a little bit of fear in my students. That might be a good thing. I don't know.
All right, Varina, so we'll turn it over to you.
Alrighty.
To lead off with and show us, but we'll do some Q&A at the end for anybody that has questions for you.
Yeah. Well, and I want to keep this you know, low key. So if you have questions, you know, feel free to jump in or dump it in the group chat, and I'll see it pop up, and you know, then I can answer questions as I go. Very informal. Formality is definitely not my strong point. So I don't know which fork to use for my salads. I just don't even care. So
For a laid back group, it's just fine.
So that's how it works for me. And I'll just jump right in. I'm going to share my screen here in a minute. But basically, Wes asked me to talk about, you know, how I go about focusing on my subject, drawing impact. I mean, maximizing impact within my images, my subject to do that, but also how I isolate my subject, how I use negative space, and you know, how for me negative space is incredibly important. I actually am a firm believer that it might even be more important than the subject itself. So so I'll show you some of my images, and we can kind of go from there. And like I said, jump in, ask questions if you want. I'm perfectly happy to make it a conversation rather than a lecture. So let's go ahead and start with this one. Can everybody see my screen there? Of course, I can't see anybody nodding because you're off my screen.
Yep, you're good, Varina.
Okay, great. All I can see is my own screen now. So. And it occurs to me that now I can't see your questions either. So Wes, if there's a question, why don't you jump in and interrupt?
Yep, no problem.
Okay.
I'll take care of it.
Great, perfect. All right, so this is a shot from Death Valley National Park in the Badlands, or sorry, not the Badlands, the Salt Flats. Gorgeous down there, just absolutely beautiful, the playa. So, like I said, I'm talking about my subject here, and in this case, it's all about that heart on the left-hand side there. And I use this photo a lot when I'm talking about defining subject, because if you look at it, it's really just cracked mud. Everything in the frame is really pretty much the same thing. It's just a lot of mud. And yet I've created a subject here for you because I know, first of all, that my viewer is going to see a heart. We have a shared understanding of shapes, and I can count on my viewer to understand the shape of a heart, right? So it's very simple. But I've also gone a little bit beyond that to make sure, absolutely sure, that you're going to see what I want you to see. And I've done that by making sure that the heart is the only complete shape in the frame. If you look at the rest of the mud in this frame, you'll notice that there isn't a single piece of mud that isn't cut off at the edges by my composition, except for that heart, right? And so I was really careful to make sure that I was in very close, but also that my composition captured only what I wanted to include and absolutely nothing else. And a lot of times I find myself wanting to crop this image even further because there's a little guy on the right-hand side. I don't know how many of you will notice him right away, but he stands out to me. There's that second piece on the right-hand side that looks like a face. It looks like a really sad little guy. And I'm tempted sometimes to crop out his mouth, because if I cut off that part of the image, not only do I cut further into that piece that I've only sliced slightly to include it in my composition, so it focuses a little bit more on my heart, but it also, takes away the feeling of a face there, that familiar face. So it's a balance that I fight with sometimes with this particular image. And the reason I leave it in there is because I kind of think he's adorable, and he looks so sad that he kind of matches my broken heart theme for this image.
His eyebrows need a little bit of trimming, but...
Right. Well, we can't all be perfect. I do think he's kind of cute, so I leave him there. And of course, once I point him out to people, right away, I've created a distraction in my image. If I don't point him out, I always wonder how many people will notice him themselves. And I think once you notice him, he does become a distraction. So I'm defeating my own purpose here. I'm taking away from my subject, right? But every now and then, as the artist, I get to decide to do that, and I've decided to do it with this image. I'm letting him stay. I think he lives there. So
wonderful way to put it.
Right. It's his broken heart after all. So let's take a look at another one. A lot of times when I'm talking about simplifying an image, I'm talking about getting in really close. This is a sea anemone. This is a shot from California. It's a tide pool shot. And I was with a group of photographers. I think maybe there were 4 or 5 of us that day. And these anemones are so beautiful. But what I found was that if you can't get in close, there's so much debris surrounding them, the sand, bits of seaweed, sand inside the anemones themselves. And it felt very distracting to me. What I really wanted to capture was so much simpler than the whole scene. It was it was the color. It was that amazing gradient of color that's happening on each and every tentacle here. And wanted to capture the graceful feel of those tentacles as they move. Now, of course, I can't capture movement, but what I can capture is a pattern that's happening here, right? So you have a pattern that's, I want to say it's a little bit like a wing, you know, they look like feathers or something. And so you can see a little bit how this creature moves despite the fact that it's a still photograph. And by simplifying the background, using a very, very narrow depth of field, I can simplify the image further. I can bring your attention even more to those tentacles and the colors. And that's what made this image work for me. There were no other options in my mind. I kept getting closer and closer. I kept fighting with my depth of field, because when you're using a macro lens and you get in close, you're stuck with a few millimeters, right? So, you know, it gets to be a little bit difficult to get everything you want within your depth of field. And in this case, and you may notice this with lots of my macro images, I love the fall off of focus. My husband Jay really likes focus stacking, and he'll do a lot of that. I almost never do focus stacking, not because I have anything against it, but because I love that fall off. I love the buttery, soft feel of focus fall off, and I think it works in a lot of situations, and I think it works here. Of course, it's my image, so of course I think it works. but there you go.
How do you go about getting the right depth of field sense? Do you do a lot of bracketing, or do you check the back of the camera? Or
I do quite a lot of bracketing, and I do check the back of the camera. Yeah, that's a really good question. I will often start at a nice f8 because it's sort of the sweet spot of your lens, and then I'll bracket towards a wider depth of field. I'll start pushing towards f16 just to see if I like it. And every now and then I'll even go down to f3, f2, and again, the closer I get, the less latitude I have in terms of opening up my aperture, because then my depth of field is so incredibly narrow that it's almost non-existent. And when I'm working with an object like this, or a creature like this that's actually moving, it's even harder to get the depth of field I need, because as soon as I frame my shot, the elements that I want in focus have moved out of my so that can be a problem. But yeah, I do both. And then I'll be in my camera, I will blow it up. I'll check to make sure I have the specific points that I want in focus nicely sharp, but I also will check areas that I don't want in focus, because like I said, as this creature moves, some of those tentacles may end up falling into focus, right? As they move into my depth of field. And I want to avoid that as well. So, not only am I checking my sharp areas, but I'm checking the areas that I don't want to be sharp too, just to make sure they're not. So that's sort of an example of when I think it's really important to be aware of your negative space as much as you're aware of your positive space or your subject.
Yeah, I love, this photo is actually a great thing a great example of a rule that I talk about a lot. Not all rules can be broken, but one of the things that I tell people a lot is that I love having the same type of border and the same width of border around 3 out of the 4 sides. And this is a perfect example, because your main subject of the little tentacles. I don't actually know what you call them.
Mhm.
But you know, you
Tentacles,
have a little bit
yeah.
of negative space on the right and the left and on the bottom. It's like perfectly framed, and then you have everything coming from that other edge. And
Mhm.
as long as you're doing 3 out of 4, that almost always works really, really well. And this is a perfect example of that.
Interesting. I've never thought of that before. I seem to do it automatically, but good call, Wes. I like
I've
that.
put a lot of thought into it in the last couple of years. It's
Yeah.
a really good rule.
Yeah, that's great. Now I'm going to start noticing it in everything I do. You know, seeing if I use it or not, or if I have violated the Wes rule.
Well, you have to tell me if I get it wrong, but
Okay, I'll let you know. All right, so let's move on. Now I've talked about some detail shots, some macro shots, but I also want to point out that this applies to wide angle photography as well. I am constantly looking for ways to simplify my wide angle landscape photography with camera angle, with camera settings, even with choosing my time of day very carefully. In this case, you have these ripples in the sand. Obviously, I needed to be there early in the day so that they weren't destroyed by footprints. I also obviously needed to be there at low tide because otherwise they would have been underwater. But on top of that, I used the light to draw your attention to the ripples I wanted you to notice the most. Now, there are ripples on the left part of this image. There are footprints in the sand on the right side of the image, which I didn't Photoshop out. You know, there's a lot going on here, really. I waited for the light to be at the angle where I knew you would be most likely to notice it against those ripples, and where it would paint only the area I wanted you to really notice. So it's a subtle thing. You know, I didn't spend hours and hours or weeks and weeks coming back to make sure I had the light just right. But I did take a series of photos over time and deliberately choose the one that I felt really drew your eye in the way I wanted it to, if that makes sense. Now this is a bracketed shot, but there's always a problem with bracketed photography when you're shooting trees. If there's any wind at all, you can get some ghosting when you try and blend those images. So the bracketing is actually happening in the foreground and in the upper left portion of the image. I shouldn't even say upper left, sorry, center left area of the image where the sky is a little bit brighter. The rest of the image is actually not bracketed. So, you know, it's a little bit different. I'm using layers and masks to do this. This is a technique I usually use. So I'm not using a standard, you know, software that does this for me. I have to do it by hand so that I can only blend the areas where I feel the blending needs to happen. But basically what I'm working for here is a simple composition that still includes quite a lot of area, right? Now, what did I leave out of the image is the most important thing. The beach on the right-hand side is collapsing, as you can see there. There's quite a lot of erosion happening along this coast. I should say this is Mana Island in Fiji. And just out of the frame to my right, there is evidence that this has been used as a bit of a landfill by the locals. There's trash falling out. It was clearly buried at one point at the top of the beach there, and as the beach breaks down, the trash is coming out, which is a little bit heartbreaking. And it's too much to clean up for one person anyway. So I did trek a little bit of that trash out of there, but certainly couldn't do it myself. Thing that I personally find distracting in this image is that little rooftop on the right-hand side. But I decided to leave it in. Once again, I could have Photoshopped it out relatively easily, but I decided to leave it in because this is a location that the locals know, and I didn't want it to feel false to them. So it was important to me to leave it. But notice how I've used the negative space. Use the light to highlight my subject, which is those ripples in the sand. And I've let those ripples lead you in towards the mountains in the distance and the trees up there. And I've let the light fall off where I don't necessarily want your eye to go. Okay, all the rocks and the debris on the beach to the left. It's still a busy composition by my standards, but that was my attempt to simplify it, and I think it works. So are there any questions about this one?
Yeah, actually Stefan has one, but in terms of the house, I actually also think it grounds us back to, you know, when I see a house like that, I picture myself being in it, and that actually gives me a great sense of, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful to live there? So I'm emotionally tied to it more because of that little tiny rooftop. But Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking. I'll have to click that. I have it. I've always struggled a bit about putting things in the corner or lines starting in the corner, like the lower right.
Mm-hmm.
I like doing that. Did you do it on purpose? Because it's not rare to get a comment that they think that someone doesn't think it should start in the corner. What would you say? Was it on purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was on purpose, actually. What I did was, if you look, you can see that the bright part of the line is just to the right of the corner, and then the shadow is in the corner. And this, I've done exactly the same thing on the left-hand side. The lowest part of the ripple touches the corner, and that's how I decided it felt the best to me. I moved. Well, those footprints on the right are mostly mine. Somebody else walked there too, so I went over them, but I walked way behind where I wanted to be. I moved up and down the beach for a few minutes trying to decide camera, and this is what felt right to me. You know, the line of the beach pulling in from the left, the dark rocks towards the end of my ripple path, if you will. You know, I was able to pull everything in towards the center of the image from this particular angle, and that's what felt right to me. So a lot of times I will think about the rule, and like you said, not having something coming directly out of the corner, and I will decide to ignore it. And that's what I did here. I did try and make sure it wasn't coming, you know, that the brightest part wasn't coming directly from the corner. But really, that's splitting hairs. So yeah, sometimes I just don't want to hear it when it comes to the rules, right?
Yeah.
So,
I know
one
what
of the
you
things I fight with is to make whether you should make the shadow line come from the corner or the light line come from the corner, right? When it's right on that edge like that. And it's always
right. Right.
Okay.
Yep. It's hard to know, but sometimes it just feels right. And this is what felt the best to me. 50 compositions from this spot, and this is the one that makes me smile when I look at it. The rest of them make me go, no, that's not right. That's not right. So there you go.
Varina, do
Thanks,
you have
Varina.
one the long way?
I'm sorry?
Like flipping your camera the other way?
Oh, a vertical shot?
Yeah.
From the same spot?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, and what I found with the vertical photos from this spot, I don't have one I can show right now. I have to dig through to find it. But
I'm just curious what you didn't like about that one.
actually, a very good question. What I found was that with a vertical shot, I was losing the little strip of water that comes in. It was much smaller, much harder to see. It didn't feel like the water was there. And it is a small part of this image, but it felt important to me. And the other thing was that I was having to cut off too many of the palm trees with a vertical shot. So I ended up with, you know, 2 palm trees sticking out that just felt a little bit odd. It felt awkward. 2 never works as well to me as maybe an odd number, or just what I have here, which is more of a spattering of them, you know. So it felt too tight to me. I wanted to include more than just the sand, and I think that an image, a vertical image for this, I would have lost some of the islands in the distance. I would have lost too many of those trees, and it just didn't work for me when I tried it. But the fact that you bring it up is interesting to me, because I originally set up my camera to capture this as a vertical shot.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that to me. That helps me think things when I'm on the field.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Thank you for
Breaking up a
explaining
little.
that to me. That really helps me think things through in the field.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad I can help.
And welcome, Bonnie. I'm glad you finally managed to get in. So we have one more participant, but keep going.
Hi, Bonnie. I'm glad you could make it. All right. So here's another shot from Fiji. And this is one where I was filming a video on Fiji. Jay and I were out there filming a course on the island. And we were out there early in the morning, and this storm was creeping up on us. And I knew that I had a choice. I could capture some photos or I could finish my video. And the video did not get finished that day because we had this incredible storm, Yeah, so we actually had to come out and shoot the next day again because the storm caught up with us. We had plenty of time to finish it, but it would have meant missing the light that was hitting the water, the crazy storm clouds in the distance. I just couldn't do it. And of course, the complete lack of footprints on the beach. Once again, this is early in the morning. There was nobody there. And it's just such a remarkable spot. Those incredible islands in the distance. Fiji is amazing. Absolutely amazing. But anyway, so once again, this for me was about simplifying the image. This is not the same beach as the one I showed, which maybe you can tell because of the color of the sand there. But we spent several mornings at this beach because the scene was so simple and it required very little for us to simplify it. It was so easy to capture a minimalist shot here. But one of the things that I did do in this shot is work to capture the lines in the waves pulling me in. It's much more difficult to do that than it is to capture sort of a scattered pattern on the beach. What I wanted was the waves set in a position where they felt like they were pulling me in towards that storm. Now, I tend to be pretty picky about how my waves look, so I'll take hundreds of photos, and of course, every wave that comes in really just wants to be photographed. It's a need the wave has. It's not me, it's the wave. But I'm kidding, of course. It's me. I can't help it. But this kind of photography for me, I'm simplifying the scene by smoothing out the ripples, and I'm working with the dead space around that, or sorry, not the dead space. I actually want to be really clear about that. There's a huge difference between negative space and dead space. And I try very hard to minimize dead space in my images and make the most of negative space.
Can you define those two for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So negative space is basically the area that is not your subject. Dead space is area within the image that contributes nothing to your image. So negative space in this particular image, if the storm is my my subject, the waves might be my secondary subject. The islands in the distance might even be a tertiary subject. That means that the green water in the midground, the sand on the left, the clouds around the outer part of the image, I would define those as negative space. And then the question is, where is the dead space? Do I have dead space in the image? And of course, we could argue this until we're blue in the face. Some people will say yes, some people will say no, and it depends on the image. It depends on who you are. But I try very hard to minimize anything in the image that does not contribute to the image. So someone might say, well, the sand on the left, is it dead or is it negative space? Negative space can be dead space. But what I don't want is to have too much dead space. Personally, I don't feel that the sand on the left is dead. I think that it provides a sense of place. It gives you information about the photo, and it gives you a feel for the sand climbing up that beach. The water climbing up that beach. Could I have gone tighter to eliminate more negative space? Absolutely. But again, negative space is not necessarily dead space. And in this case, I don't see dead space in this image. For me, it's not dead. Now, I do have some examples of dead space that I can show you in a few minutes here. And in fact, maybe I will
hold on,
go down and
so really quickly, because Debbie actually has a question about this one, but I would like to thank you for that. The last 2 minutes was sort of the the perfect thing that I've been trying to say in my sphere 2. So if you make it all the way through my instruction set, you'll find out that you just described, exactly what I'm trying to get people to look at. So thank you. That was perfect.
Excellent. You're very welcome. Glad to be of service. All right, Debbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if this was also a composite, since the water on the sand is moving, but it looks like the water out further away is frozen.
That's a good question. It is actually not a composite. The water in the foreground is moving much more than the water in the distance because it's coming up a slightly sloped beach. And of course, as the waves crash, they have quite a bit of momentum. And then the water in the distance is more stationary, so it just doesn't appear to have as much motion. And of course, the motion blur is enhanced in the foreground because of the white foam on the water, so it tends to stand out a little bit. But it's not a composite. It is, however, a photo where I used a graduated neutral density filter. Just to bring down the brightness of the sky so that it matched the brightness of the foreground. The dynamic range was too extreme,
right.
So I brought it down that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Thanks.
How do you go about, so this is my personal question because I suck at this, so I need help too. How do you go about picking shutter speeds for stuff like this? Because I'm always challenged, and somewhere there's a math formula. You know me and write math and stuff. So I figure there's got to be, the average miles per hour divided by something will give you your shutter speed, to make it sort of the perfect amount of blur. And I hit this with my daughter on horseback, and trains going by, and including panning or not panning, whatever it may be. Do you have any good rules of thumb?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're going to do is you're going to take the velocity of the waves and divide it by the square root. I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. You guys are all like, oh my God. Okay. No.
You had me there for a second until you said
I thought I might.
I knew you were
April
lying.
Fool. There we go. I was tempted to say the airspeed velocity of a European swallow, but
I'm really bad at mathematics.
No. To see Wes gotten.
Yeah, sorry, Wes. But no, honestly, what I do is I experiment. It changes based on how fast those waves are moving, what I want from the scene, too. How I'm feeling at that particular moment, what kind of mood I want from my photograph. And so I do a lot of experimentation on location in the moment. I'm adjusting my shutter speed. I'm taking a look at the photo as it shows up on my screen. I'm zooming in to check and see if I like it, and I'll go all over the place. I know that Jay tends to be able to toss out a shutter speed to students. They'll say, what should my shutter speed be? And he'll say 2.5 seconds, or 30 seconds. And a lot of times I don't work that way because I don't necessarily want what Jay wants, and so my vision for what I want tends to be variable. In one moment it's one thing, and in another moment it's something else. Let me look and see what my shutter speed is. Yeah, I can't even tell you what it was, right? It's 1/10 of a second. So that means to me that the water was moving pretty quickly. I only needed about 1/10 of a second to capture the blur that I wanted. And of course, those waves, when they hit the beach, it even depends on the slope of the beach. So I have photos that are similar where I've used a 30-second shutter speed because that's what I wanted. That's the effect I wanted, and that's what it took to get it. Okay, so no, there's not a formula that I use. And you'll find most people are not using a formula to do this.
No, it's more, especially for moving subjects where you don't have you know, the opportunity to take multiple shots,
Mhm.
you know, action shots and things like that. You know, so you either get it right or you don't. So that's always a problem. But,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah,
Thank you very
that's
much.
true. That's true. I don't shoot too many trains.
Thank you.
The nice thing about shooting the waves on the beach is that they keep coming back.
Yes. and
No.
you keep getting wet too, I suspect. But
This is very true. I tend to get a little bit damp, but that's okay. I'm not complaining. I almost always take off my shoes, roll up my pants, or wear shorts on a beach like this. There's no point in wearing shoes if you're just going to get water in them anyway. So I spend a lot of time photographing barefoot.
is this handheld, or did you actually have a tripod that got hit by the waves?
No, I have a tripod. Yeah. When I'm shooting on the beach, I am pushing my tripod into the sand as deep as it'll go to try and keep the tripod steady, but it's still a bit of a challenge to keep it exactly where I want it. I have lots and lots of photographs where the whole scene is tilted and blurred because the waves moved my tripod more than I wanted them to.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Can I say something about, we were, 2 weeks ago, we were at a North Carolina beach and it was really cold, and we took our $25 Walmart rubber boots.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody else had their sneakers on and had really cold feet, and we didn't. So if you're someplace where you don't feel like wearing shorts, that's a good option too.
You know, I've never thought of taking my you know, wading boots to the beach. That's a really good idea. I like that.
Yep.
Stefan?
You know.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Stefan.
Okay.
Let me add one more thing to that before we get to Stefan, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I actually own a pair of neoprene diving booties. I use them for diving, but they are fantastic on the beach because they won't let sand in. They're nice and tight, and they will keep you warm even as your feet get wet. And usually you can get them for $20-25, and they're easy to roll up, fit in a suitcase. They're great.
Yep, that's what I use, and that's what I was going to suggest.
Oh, sorry. I stole your thunder.
Wait up.
Yeah, they're great.
Stefan?
Yeah, okay. I was thinking about the crashing wave by the horizon, by the middle of the horizon. Did you ever contemplate removing it? I'd say that it's in a good spot, but it does pull my eye quite a bit, and it's a good spot because it's by the storm.
Yeah, I did consider removing it. A lot of times, if it takes me more than a few seconds to decide if something should be removed, I let it stay. And this is one of those cases. I considered removing it. I stared at it for a little while. It spoke to me. I spoke to it. I decided it got to stay because, like I said, if I have to think about it too long, it just feels right to leave it. Part of the reason I decided to leave it in this case is because I felt that little bit of detail out there in the distance really did help add to the scene. I felt that it wasn't enough of a distraction. It wasn't pulling away too much from the storm. And to see that little bit of white water out there, that's the reality of this beach. The waves are breaking in the distance and breaking a second time here on the beach because the beach is so shallow. So it ended up feeling right to me to leave it there.
Yeah, I mean it's in a good spot. It is.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I understand that.
Stu,
Thank
who's
you.
one of the heroes of the Arcanum, has a good rule that I've always liked, the way he phrases it, which he says, I figure, I think about the object and then think, would I miss it if it was gone? And if not, then he removes it. So he's a big fan of removing anything that he would miss. And I think with that wave, I think I would miss it. I think that actually adds a huge amount of depth to your image that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. And maybe I need to tone it down a little. Certainly a thought, but I'll keep looking at it and decide.
I'm asking because I'd had a hard time deciding that that 3-second rule maybe might work for me too.
Yeah, I like that, the 3-second rule. Look at it for 3 seconds. If you haven't made up your mind, leave it.
What you do is you drop a piece of toast on the ground, and if you can't decide by the time you pick up the toast and decide to eat it, because that met the 3-second rule, then you
Oh,
Okay.
very good. Well, I thought maybe if you measure the velocity of the toast as it falls and divide that of the square root of the velocity of the wave.
I have to say that Debbie handed me a birthday card and a couple of other people last year that on the front of the card was, "You want to hear something really cool about science?" And I opened it up and it said, "You would, you geek."
Yeah, I would. I'm such a geek. That's great.
Anyway.
All right. Well, let's talk about dead space a little bit more. How about this one? How's that for dead space? So this was a spot that I loved. I spent so much time here, and finding my composition took me a long time because I was trying to include too much. So I'll show you in a minute the photo I came away with. And I think those of you who were in my cohort in the first place, and those of you who have seen my work know that this is not a typical composition for me, because there's a lot happening here. But more than that, to me, this is extremely unbalanced. The right-hand side of the image feels very calm and peaceful. It's sort of pastel. The left-hand side of the image is very heavy. That dark, part of the island sticking out there is drawing your eye. It's so heavy in the scene. The leading lines pull you right into it, so you can't miss it. And even the color of the light over in that part of the image is very, very different from what's happening on the right side of the image. So I decided that I didn't like it. And in the end, I had to go back to sort of my 4-step process for deciding what my composition is going to be. Now, obviously, I don't really walk through 4 steps as I'm out there shooting, as I'm thinking about my compositions. It's actually something that I've put thought into for my students so that I can say, here, think about these 4 things. But basically, I did this. I said, all right, I need to define my subject. That's step 1. And my subject in this case, when I thought about it, was the color. It doesn't always have to be an object or a person, an animal. It can be something else. It can be a mood. It can be a feeling. In this case, I wanted to capture the color. The image was about color for me. So if my subject is color, then the second question is, which elements complement my subject? Now, right away I said, okay, the color in the sky, the color in the water, the mountains in the distance, the islands, I should say, the islands in the distance, they complement that subject for me because they don't overwhelm it. Okay, they're subtle enough, they're beautiful, but they don't overwhelm the color in the image. And the patterns in the water or in the sand under the water complemented my color subject. So my third question is, which elements distract from my subject? And that's easy. If color is my subject, then that big chunk of land sticking out on the left-hand side is a distraction. And so is the brown sand on the left, the leading line that takes me in, and the white sand on the left is a distraction as well. And in fact, there's a whole area of sky that didn't feel like it was working for me in this case because it seemed to lack color, that white area of sky there. And so once I had determined those first 3 questions, I was able to say, okay, this is not the composition I want. This is the composition I want. So once again, water. Luckily, it was warm. I didn't need my neoprene boots, but I was able to just take off my flip-flops and leave them up on the beach. But this, for me, brought out exactly what I was looking for. Very, very subtle colors, a very smooth and minimalist composition. I defined my subject here as color, but I wasn't talking about intense, crazy colors, right? I'm not talking about primary colors. I'm talking about the incredible reflections that are happening on the water from the color in the sky and the beautiful color of the water coming out. Very, very subtle colors that I felt were important. So I defined my subject. I thought about the elements that would complement the subject. I thought about the elements that would distract from the subject. And finally, my last question to myself is, how can I use camera settings to draw attention to the subject and minimize distractions? Okay, so that's the final thing. Once I've thought about the physical elements of the scene, then I can think about what control I have beyond just choosing my composition, and that comes down to my camera. So shutter speed, used a very long shutter speed to smooth the surface of the water. Let me take a look and see what my shutter speed was. It was a 30-second shutter speed. That doesn't surprise me at all. 30-second shutter speed, no ripples on the surface of the water. Now, that helps to simplify my scene, right? All those ripples that you would expect as the waves come in are just smoothed out. And of course, smoothing them out also serves to enhance the reflected light on the surface. You can see it a little bit better because it's not being scattered quite so much by ripple patterns in the water. Okay, so along to smooth the surface and simplify it even further. And of course, it also serves to blur the clouds just a little bit, simplify the scene that way. So a very minimalistic composition with very little dead space and lots of negative space.
That was a perfect set of examples. That's a stunning image. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. You know, this one is one of my favorites from Fiji because it conveys how I felt being out there. And that's, you know, again, that's oftentimes what I'm after when I'm shooting. I'm looking for minimalist compositions, but I'm also looking to convey a feeling that I have when I'm there, which is so very different from my normal life, you know, 6 kids and all of them teenagers and college. And
you take these images just so you can look at them in the peaceful moment of a day, right? And bring yourself back.
That's
to
right.
standard, right.
That's right. This is my meditation. Yeah.
Varina, I sometimes struggle when people ask me what the subject of my photo is.
Yes.
I tend to just wander around and take pretty things. And if this was my photo and someone asked me, that would probably be my answer. So other than color, are there other kind of more abstract things you take photos of than call your subject?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I don't think that as an artist, you should be put in a box of having to choose something specific as your subject. And you're right, a lot of people expect it to be an object, something like that, right? But your subject can be light. It can be, like I said here, it can be color, of course. It can be a mood. I want to see if I have a photo in here that maybe conveys, well, honestly, if you look at this photo, maybe it's as much about mood as it is about color. Maybe it's more about mood than color. Of course, that's up to anybody's interpretation. But yeah, it can be about pattern. It can be about line.
That's a great question, Linda. And I'll be perfectly honest, one of the hardest things for me in putting together this Sphere 2 instruction set that you're walking through is the use of the word subject too much, because I agree with you absolutely. Yeah. But the reality is, as Varina has said, you have to pick something that you want the viewer to see out of it. That doesn't necessarily need to be a physical object, but you know, some other examples. She said earlier that she really likes the fall off and depth of field, right? That can be a subject. Speed can be a subject. Velocity can be a subject. You know, there's a ton of other things that are abstract. I think that's a great point, Varina.
Yeah, that's an excellent addition to that answer too, Wes. Well done. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you both. I'm going to have to think about that for a while.
Yeah, let it sink in. And when you're out there, you know, shooting, never pigeonhole yourself. Never feel like you can't do it because somebody thinks you should more precisely. You know, these are just guidelines. But it's about, you know, if it's about sharing something pretty, then that's enough. It's okay to do it that way.
If I spend time thinking about what you two have said, I can make my photo stronger. So I do already take the photo and just appreciate its prettiness, but I feel like that might be the next step for me.
So do it afterwards. Yeah. So go take, you know, if you see something pretty in your frame that attracts your attention, take it. Don't stress over then, you know, is this worth taking? take it home and then look at it and then use that to analyze why you thought that, you know, it was pretty in the field. What was it what is it attracting you to? And spend an hour thinking about it. You'll come up with a lot more ideas.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? I want to show another photo to go a little deeper into that, because I like that point and I think it's an important one. So this is just a water droplet inside a rose. This is a studio shot. That's all it is, right? It's just a water droplet. But excuse me. I saw something pretty. It was the rose originally that was so pretty to me. I wanted to photograph it. I wanted to capture it. I kept getting in closer because that's what I tend to do. I ended up pulling out a macro lens to get even closer. And it took me a long time to realize that what I thought was pretty, way beyond the rose. Okay? It had to do with the color of the rose. It had to do with the curve of the petals, the water droplets that curve, the patterns that I was seeing, right? So I probably 2 hours trying to figure out why it was pretty to me, right? Not to everybody else necessarily, although it does tend to work for all of us. But I was looking for why it was pretty. And in exploring that idea, I found a composition that to me was much stronger than simply a photograph of a rose. Because a photograph of a rose has been done 1,000 times, maybe 1,000,000, maybe 1,000,000,000, right? It's been done. And it didn't capture what I was trying to find, the essence of the beauty of the rose. So maybe that's an abstract concept and it can be difficult to explain, but I think with an image like this where you can see how simplified the scene is, how much I took away. You know, there's no background of a wall or you know, a room or the outdoors. There's no edge of the petals. In fact, there's only one petal here, or maybe two. I think it's just one. That's a curly petal, isn't it? Huh. But you know, in order to find the essence of the beauty of it, it took quite a lot of time. But I think you can do that. So what's my subject here? Maybe that water droplet, but at the same time, it could also be color, and it could also be beauty. So, you know, we can take it apart and we can look at it in a million different ways. But I have another example that I want to show you too, for sort of the same idea. This is a waterfall in Pennsylvania. Gorgeous area where there are just tons of falls dropping out of the hillsides all around. Now, Jay loves waterfalls. Jay is a waterfall aficionado, and he will spend hours photographing waterfalls. And I love them too, don't get me wrong, when it comes to waterfalls, because I find myself wanting more from them. And so I will spend a lot of time seeking out a composition that makes the most of the waterfall. And for me, this wasn't it. In fact, the composition that made the most of this waterfall for me is this. So, I mean, clearly it doesn't show the waterfall. In fact, this isn't even in the photograph that I showed you before. It's a little aside where I found myself watching the stream of water and the pull of color through the stream, which I thought was just beautiful. So this composition took me far longer than the first composition. In fact, Jay was done photographing the waterfall before I was ready to release the shutter for this photo, because it takes time to set up a macro photo, get everything in focus, get your camera and tripod exactly where you want them, choose your shutter speed and aperture, you know, decide how much background you want, how simple your background needs to be. But basically, what I'm getting at here is not that I'm suggesting that you take every scene and you simplify it to the point where it is almost unrecognizable, as I've done here. Looking at every scene and trying to understand what it is exactly about the scene that is drawing you to it. What's pretty? What is it? Why? You know? And I think that over time, I've really started to understand what draws me. And a lot of times it's something like this. Now, that's not necessarily what's going to draw you, but it's such an incredible challenge to try and think on a deeper level about what it is that's drawing you, what's drawing your attention, and what's grabbing you, and what makes that scene speak to you. So, you know, I think it's worth, as a thought exercise, I think it's worth taking the time to try and understand why it's pretty or why it speaks to you. Does that make sense?
Very much does. Those are wonderful examples. I love seeing your explanation of you know, your before and after thinking for the last couple ones that you showed. It really kind of locks it in for us, I think. But I will say that we are coming up on an hour, and I did promise you that we would be no longer than an hour. I could listen to you all day, so I'll let you do what you want. But since you're probably not staring at a clock, I'll remind you of the clock. So.
Right. I was not staring at a clock. That's true. I do have to get my son off to martial arts before long here, but I can take some questions, and you know, I can probably do another 15 minutes.
Okay. That would be more than fine with me.
So, okay.
As I said, I'll listen to you until your voice goes dead. So.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. But does anybody have any questions about, you know, anything I've talked about, or just questions you want to ask? I'm happy to, you know, give you whatever I can. See some more images.
Okay, it's your guys' chance. If you don't, then I'll start throwing questions. But we should go with you first.
I have
you know,
one,
I
think.
there's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Stefan.
Go ahead.
Okay, the rose one, the red with the water droplet.
Yes.
Do you ever? I suspect that you didn't in this case, but do you ever plant things like drops in flowers and stuff like that?
Yeah, I do.
Did you do it in that case?
No, I did not. It was there. It was there. It was waiting for me, and it just took me a little while to realize it was trying to get my attention.
Yeah, I struggled with that because I mean, you know, I shoot a lot of flowers. I tend to find that when I don't plant them, and I'm lucky to find the right thing, it's usually the better composition or photo.
Yeah, I think that happens quite a lot for me too. I feel that if it's already there, it's a stronger composition, but maybe more than that, it feels more authentic to me, and so you know, I prefer it. But yeah, I use spray bottles to create water droplets all the time. It doesn't bother me to do that. Yeah, it's art. We can't take ourselves too seriously, right? I actually see there's a question from Debbie that I didn't see before. It says, is this also a composite with moving water and frozen water?
You answered that one already, actually.
Yeah,
that was about the beach.
Oh, that was about the beach. Okay, I was thinking it was about the stream of water in the from the waterfall.
Yeah, the ones you missed actually were the very top one where Jason said it looked like Groot, which I assume, Jason, that was talking about the mud picture, right? That your little guy in the mud was Groot.
You're right.
Groot.
It's got to be Groot. I like that. That's perfect. Oh, that's too good.
All right. So can you give us any hints on you know, the one thing I struggle with the most? So, you know, usually the reason I don't take a picture is not because the subject isn't right, but because the background isn't right or the negative space isn't right. Right. That actually, you know, makes the framing, and you do such a wonderful job in all of your work.
Thank you.
That, you know, your surrounding body of the subject is just perfect every single time. How do you decide how much negative space or how much, you know, when to go only the subject versus the subject and properly balance it with some random percentage, back to math again, of you know, negative space versus subject. Yeah, right. Square Groot.
Square Groots. Yes, exactly. Very good. Well, that's a good question. I don't spend too much time trying to get it right. I spend a lot of time looking at my subject and trying to let it speak in a way. That sounds so cliche.
It's like a wise sage on the top of the mountain, and we'll take that and think about it for a while.
Yes, exactly. I may have to go find a sage just to answer that question. But no, I do think it's hard. I mean, I think, you know, you start out with the rule of thirds, and you know, try and follow it to the point where you feel good about it. When that doesn't feel good to you, you trash the rule of thirds and don't worry about it anymore, because it's not a rule, it's a suggestion, right? But I do, I think that, at least for me, there's a bit of zen to it. It slaps you across the face when it feels right, or it slaps me across the face. I don't know that it does that to everyone. I think I remember years ago I was arranging objects on a mantelpiece. I had just moved into a new apartment. I was moving some things around, and every time I walked into the room, I would glance over at the mantelpiece and just go, that's not it, and I would move something, you know, and I'd leave the room, and a few minutes later, that's not it, I'd move something else, and all of a sudden, there, it's right, you know, and it doesn't make any sense really, and yet it did just feel right, and I never moved anything again until I moved out, because that's where it belonged, you know? So yeah, it is sort of a sense of zen, and I don't think I can give you a definitive answer on that beyond
That's okay.
when it feels right. Yeah. But when in doubt, follow the rule of thirds, because it is a rule that often works.
You know, I have a non-photography related instructor once that used to like to say that rules are something that mean that when you have a rule, you should follow it 60% of the time. And, you know, the other 40% is the time that you break it. So, and one thing that I tell people all the time is that you have to learn all the rules, because that's what enables you to figure out when to break it. And when you break them, don't break it a little bit, right? You need to like shatter it.
I agree with that, actually. Break it a little bit and you look like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's nothing like your subject being a little bit out of focus. If you're going to do it, either have that have that subject tack sharp, or let it be blurred. Really, really blurred. So yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that there's a sense of balance that you're looking for. You know, I showed you the image with the dark beach coming in on the left and the very smooth colors on the right. Look for balance as much as you're looking for position of elements in your frame. See if you have a heavy area on one side, or a very distracting element in one area that's really going to call your attention, because it changes the balance. And so I do that a lot. I spend a lot of time thinking about balance, not in specific terms, but more in the abstract as I'm planning my compositions.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody have one last question before we let Varina go off to her martial arts, child's martial arts class?
That's right. I have to take him because he's a black belt. If I don't, you know.
Well, maybe you should take the class too.
No, I don't think so. All those teenage boys, they'll damage me.
There's adult classes.
Yeah, that's true.
If there are no questions, I think I can add a thought to what you were talking about, Varina.
Go for it.
I think this was one of the first things that I learned about photography. That wasn't about rules or anything practical in a sense, and it's to get to know your subject. And I think we've talked about this before. Like the mantelpiece, you had to get to know it. You had to spend time with it. And if you shoot birds, it's about learning their behavior and stuff. If you shoot landscapes, it's about for me at least, it's about getting to know this specific spot, spend time with it, hours. Sometimes just sitting there and not doing much. If you spend that time, you'll be rewarded. Like with
I
the
think you're right.
mantelpiece.
Yeah, and like the waterfall where I ended up photographing that tiny stream, or the rose where I ended up photographing just the curve of the petal and the tiny water droplet. Yeah, I think it comes down to really getting to know your subject, and also getting to know yourself and what makes you tick, what draws you in, because chances are what's drawing you in is pretty similar to what's going to draw your viewer, get their attention.
I had a photography lecture probably a decade ago. I've forgotten, but something he said always stuck with me, which is that he will often force himself not to take a camera. So he's a wildlife photographer, and it's actually even more critical there that he'd go out the day beforehand and watch the patterns of the bird, watch the branches that they would sit on, watch stuff. And he knew he didn't take a camera. He deliberately left it home because he knew if he had it, he'd be too tempted to pick it up. Right. And he would miss actually interacting with that environment. And I think one of the reasons that photo walks work so well, it's not because you're with a bunch of other photographers that push you hard. That's reason one. Reason two is you're out there for an entire day, right? There's no better way to get to know an area, if you were truly deep and immersed for an 8-hour walk or something like that. All right.
Any suggestion? My sister and I are doing a 1-week road trip end of April. Any suggestions for, like Stefan said, a lot of it is getting to know the area that you're shooting. But if you're just going on a trip, just shoot what catches your eye.
Well, I think what I would do, what I do when I travel is I try and give myself as much luck as I can. So it becomes not so much luck as putting a lot of thought into it. Now, you're traveling, you may be traveling with someone who's not a photographer, which makes it harder.
She's not.
Right. So that changes things too. So if you're traveling with a group of photographers, give me 1 second, I'll get back to not photographers. Then we spend a lot of time thinking about the best time to go out, when the light's going to be great, where the storm's going to be, where the edge of the storm is going to be, even more important. But when I'm out there with people who aren't photographers, I always feel pressed for time. I always feel that I'm keeping them waiting, and I don't like to do that, But yes. So maybe my answer is yes, I shoot what I see, I shoot what I love, but I also try really hard to share it with the person I'm with. For example, a lot of times, especially when they were a little younger, I would take my children out with me when I was shooting locally. And when one of my children pointed out something beautiful, I would make a point, or interesting, didn't have to be beautiful, whatever drew their eye, I would make a point of having them help me create an image with it. And it works for adults too. People get excited. They want to see what you come up with. And when they feel like they're part of it, that helps. One of the things I've done with my kids is ask them to create my background for me. A lot of times when I'm photographing a leaf or a water droplet, the background is not what I want. I have one photograph. It's right there, actually. Can you see it? On the wall. That photograph is just a frozen water droplet on a leaf. My son noticed it. He loved it, and he, thought it was really interesting. But the background was brown and dull. It was uninteresting, and so I decided to have him help me create the background, and we collected leaves off the ground, and he is holding them up in that image. He actually is my background there. I tried his mitten first. It was blue. It didn't work. But in the end, he and I agreed on the background. So just pulling him into it and making him feel that he was a part of it really helped. And he's pretty proud of that composition even now. And of course, it has a little more meaning for me as well because he helped create it. So it's kind of special.
Yeah, no, kids definitely do enjoy that. My both my kids now actually will find spots in a forest and say, you have to come see this. And you know what? A lot of times they're right. In fact, one of my most recent public posts was from something they found and drug me through a snow pile to go find it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is, you know, it's a neat challenge. For me, photography is all about the challenge. I love the challenge of it. I love kind of pushing myself beyond what I've done before and trying to do something different with every location. You know, a lot of these locations people have been to a million times, they've been photographed a million times, it's all been done. And yet I don't feel that way. I never feel that way, that it's always already been done. I feel like there's a way you can do it differently, that you can make it your own. And so that challenge is something I really enjoy. And when you add something like a time constraint or a having to shoot in harsh lighting conditions, or adding other people who maybe want you to hurry up, you know, that maybe that's your time constraint, but those are just additional challenges that I really enjoy. It's kind of like taking a single lens out, you know, to challenge yourself to build a collection of images using that single lens. I think I've had a lot of instructors who suggest that as an exercise. I don't know. So approaching it as a challenge and as an exercise to expand your creative potential, I think it can work. I think it's all in how you look at it.
Right. I think those are fantastic words to probably end with too, so we can let you go. But thank you so much for your time today. It was I was mesmerized. I lost track of the time and had to go look at the clock and make sure that that we weren't holding you here too long. And I hope the rest of you, you know, Varina's hinted at maybe coming back as a master again to do a 2 or 3 at some point. So I'm sure you'll all be willing to sign up immediately if she actually does. But we'll see if that
hurry up and get through Robin's.
What's that?
I said I'm going to have to hurry up and get through Robin's.
And I have to get my mean streak on.
Well,
I don't think you can do that.
Yeah, with my clock here, you've been only for 20 minutes.
I see. So I still have to. I still have more to do, huh?
Yeah,
all right. So do you have another hour's worth of material for us, Varina?
Sure. I've been doing this for years now. I'll come up with something.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
It was great. It was great meeting those of you I haven't met before, and it was great seeing those of you who were in my original cohort again.
Yeah.
Really great.
We're still here.
Yeah. I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Varina and Wes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.